Very good morning, everybody, and welcome to our fourth and final EUDR Winter School. I was just talking to Elisabeth about the fact that we actually made it here. It's been quite a hectic journey for us, for you as well. I'm sure UDR has been a bit of a roller coaster, taking us from amendment to amendment, from update to update, giving us news out of Brussels every 2 weeks that changed the direction that it was going in. But of course, we've tried to adapt during those whirlwinds, those roller coaster rides, and it has been an interesting experience for us as well. But of course, we're not at the finish line yet because we still have a whole session to go. Elisabeth and I have prepared a few slides, I think around 40 to be exact, where we take you through all of the details of what we are of how to get ready for EUDR. For those that perhaps are joining us for the first time, very briefly, Elisabeth and I are sustainability researchers at Coolset and have been spending the better part of half a year working on EUDR, making it operational, making it work within a software setting, which essentially means getting a deep understanding. And of course, every time we then worked on the next step, there was confusions, there was questions. So hopefully, us answering those questions internally will also now translate to answering those questions during these winter school sessions. So we have a lot to cover today. So I think we can move on to the agenda. And perhaps also a quick note, a housekeeping note. Once again, if you have questions, put them in the bottom right in the question tab. And then if you have any chat notes that you want to share, feel free to put them in the chat function. So anything about feedback, comments, any technical issues, knock on wood that doesn't happen today. I have kind of a hope that today will be the first session where we don't have anything going on in terms of IT issues. But we always try to prepare as best we can, by the way. So it's not that we are always clumsy, but there's somehow ends up, something happening. Maybe Elisabeth, can you check your microphone?
Yes, please confirm if you can hear me as well clearly.
Yes, if this is confirmed, then I think we're going to be smooth sailing from here on out, but maybe I just jinxed it. Okay, perfect. I see some comments saying that it's good. So let's hope that it stays here and that I didn't jinx it. Anyways, lot to cover today, as you can see. So we have an update from Brussels, as is always good to mention, because for those that have been following it, or perhaps also joined our webinar on Monday where we did a Brussels update, a lot has happened. So we'll briefly cover that. Then we'll go over a recap of Canal Chocolate, the company that we created for the sake of the winter school. Then we'll go over DDS and Traces. How does it work? What does it mean? Then we'll cover operator data to collect. With all the amendments going around, there's now various definitions of operators that we need to be aware of. So what are the different roles? What do the routes look like in reality? Preparing for the next steps. And then we have it's a bit of a surprise for most of you perhaps, but we have a certificate at the end. So we're seeing a lot of people these days going on LinkedIn, for example, after they've completed certain courses or whatnot. And of course, the winter school is a course like any other. So we have a certificate for those that attended these courses, and you can share them internally or on LinkedIn, or you can send it to your grandma to show her that you're doing something impressive. So, well, maybe that's gloating a bit too much. I wouldn't say that this is worth sending to your grandma per se. But anyways, let's stay on track, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. So let's move on. So the goal for today is to help you understand DDS submission and traces, to help you understand your responsibilities as an operator, and of course, to be prepared for your EUDR journey, as this is our fourth and last session for this winter, essentially. I'm sure we'll have more EUDR sessions coming up, but this is the fourth and last, and our promise to you at the beginning was that we'll get you ready for EUDR. So here it goes. Quick update from Brussels, so you can also kind of follow the developments there. So what are we seeing? Quick overview of the headline decisions from Parliament. So what happened last week is that the European Parliament, as one of the three big EU institutions, so next to the Commission and the Council, came forward with a proposal. So they voted for a 12-month delay for medium and large operators. They included a clause for an additional delay for micro and small operators to the 30th of June, 2027. They introduced a one-time declaration for micro and small primary operators, and they narrowed downstream operator obligations and cut pass-through duties. They also exclude the HS code 49, which is printed products and newspapers, which would mean that essentially companies importing printed products from out of the EU fall out of the obligations. But then, of course, most companies that work with printed products or newspapers, for example, import paper and then turn it into newspapers or printed products. So that means you're not exempted from responsibilities. Anyways, these are just a small asterisk to this whole story. These are proposals by the parliament, and they will now go through trilogue negotiations with the council and the commission, who have sometimes similar but sometimes opposing amendments. So this is by no means final. Yeah, moving on, we have a legislative roadmap. So here we kind of see the developments on the, how it's gone in the past couple of months. So how it usually goes and how it's also gone here is that the commission proposes. So that's always the commission. The commission is an honest broker and develops the drafts that are then kind of amended by the council and the parliament. That first step happened on October 21st. Then on November 17th, the council adopted a position, which in this case was backed by 24 out of 27 member states. And then on November 26th, the parliament adopted a position in which the parliament kind of voted with the EPP, basically the biggest party, voted with far right parties to get that coalition together. And then hopefully before the end of this year, we'll see a trilogue agreeing on a final text, which is very necessary, because if it doesn't happen, then on paper, the official legislation rolls through, which means that by the 1st of January of 2026, people or operators need to have a due diligence statement ready to go. I don't think that will be enforced necessarily, but it is good to keep in mind that technically the member states will then be infringing on their own laws that they've implemented if they don't agree on the final text before then. Very quick overview of the amendments and who passed it. So we won't go into too much detail here, but just a quick overview of all the amendments. And what I think is interesting to cover here is to show you a majority of that passed it. And you'll see in most cases it was a majority of the European People's Party, the European Conservatives and Reformists group, the Patriots for Europe, and the Europe of Sovereign Nations. And these are right to far right groups that the EPP, which is the biggest party, promised never to work with outside of inside of the European Parliament. And that was said less than 8 months ago by the EPP leader. And now it's kind of a new normal. This is also the majority that was used to form a coalition on the omnibus proposal that went out not too long ago. So quite a concerning development, if you ask me, just because it shows that there's kind of a new shifting line of what's acceptable. And I'm seeing here that also in the comments, which I always really appreciate, that you're also kind of so proactive in sharing information. Colinda's mentioning that the final vote on EUDR and Omnibus will be on December 16th. So yeah, good to keep in mind that date as well. Hopefully they will pass it, as we saw, for example, with the first Omnibus when it was voted on. It wasn't passed, at least not in the smaller jury group. But yeah, then we'll hopefully have more clarity so we can all enter the Christmas season with some regulatory clarity, which is what we're all hoping for that the Christmas season will bring. Moving on. What remains unclear heading into trilogues? So there's a couple of things on the procedural side. So the Commission might resist part of the simplification package, such as excluding downstream operators or having a delay. And also another question is how fast the regulation will be published in the official journal. So that's kind of an official formal step that will usually take. So if once it's published in the official journal, that means that it will be official law. But usually it happens on the 20th day of being published in the official journal. Don't ask me why. But now they've also asked for that to be fast-tracked so that after the 3rd day of publication in the official journal, it becomes law. Then on the technical side, there's still the question of clarification on the requirements of the DDS for operators. So, for example, whether annual estimates are optional or mandatory, the precise legal wording for downstream operators and trader responsibilities, there's still some unclarity there, and what counts as a major change for updating SME simplified declarations. So SMEs now have simplified declarations. They only have to send kind of a one-time declaration under certain conditions, and only if there's a major change, their responsibility there changes, which is something that hasn't been defined. That kind of that part major change is that when they change their business models, that when they change their name or their headquarters, that's also something to be sorted out. If you want to know more about this whole process, so as I mentioned, this past Monday, we've had a webinar exclusively on the whole political process surrounding EUDR. So you can find that if you go to coolstar.com/webinars, and then you should see the webinar pretty far at the top from our past webinars, and then you can watch the recording for free. So yeah, to not spend too much time on that, feel free to do that. And today we'll cover more of the proactive topics on how to continue. So a quick recap on Canal Chocolate. Where did we stand last week? So what did we achieve last week? Canal Chocolate mapped full traceability and validated core geolocation data. They completed the first risk assessments and flagged priority issues. They launched targeted mitigation steps with high-risk suppliers, and they set up a working DDS flow with clear internal rules. That was the kind of the task that they went through last week. And I'm also kind of keeping an eye on the comment section here, on the chat section, and I'm seeing a chat from Andrea asking, can someone tell me how to make the screen display, the slides, the bigger one? I didn't have this problem last week, but this time it's my turn. Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes this happens for some users. So indeed, as Saskia mentioned, you should refresh your browser to see if that fixes it. But also there's a toggle, I think, on the bottom right with settings that allows you to go full screen, and that should help fix it. Let me know if that works or if it doesn't, and then perhaps we'll have some more tips that we can rely on. But of course, by now we have a great chat community that also helps each other. I see it works. Perfect. Good to hear, Andrea. So moving on, quick overview of the supply chain of Canal Chocolate. So we have, for example, certain plots in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They have then an aggregator in Congo as well. They have another plot here, and then they also have plots in South Africa. And what we see here is that essentially that all then goes to certain suppliers, goes to Canal Chocolate in the Netherlands, but they also have a German wholesaler that also sells to them. Not so relevant for now, but more to give you an idea of where they stand and what their supply chain looks like, and that will help you understand how the following sections will come together. Okay, moving on to DDS and traces. So how do you break it down? What do they mean, and how do we make sense of it all? So the due diligence statement, which is essentially the piece of paper that you spend all this time working towards, is a digital declaration confirming that the due diligence obligations have been completed. Very important to note here, and something that I'll repeat a couple more times throughout these slides, is that it is not the due diligence itself. It confirms what is placed on the market, where it comes from, that the risk is negligible, and who is responsible. So it essentially is a sheet of paper. It's an A4 that confirms that you have yourself confirmed that you went through all the necessary due diligence, but it does not confirm that basically the due diligence itself has been done correctly. So some more context on those in the next slides. What does the DDS then contain? So very detailed overview here. So first of all, it needs the product information, of course, so that includes the HS code, the trade name. If it's wood, so a timber product, it needs the scientific name, and of course the quantity. It also needs the country of production, so that's all the countries where the commodity was grown / harvested. That's relevant because according to EUDR, there's a low, medium, low, standard, and high risk classification. And based on that, if it's low risk, you don't need to do the risk assessment. If it is standard or high risk, you do need to do the risk assessment, which is Article 10. So that also tells then the auditor or whoever checks your due diligence process that it was done correctly. Geolocation is all the coordinates for the plot. So if it's less than 4 hectares, you can disclose a point, which is a single coordinate. And if it's more than 4 hectares, you need a polygon, which is at least 3 coordinates, essentially creating the shape of the plot of land where it came from. Good to note here is that this is also something that's being discussed under the new proposals that, for example, small micro primary operators can disclose the address instead of a polygon. The production dates, of course, also very important because that's what's referenced for checking for deforestation. So here you need to check the harvest / production window, confirming the cutoff for compliance. And then operator details include the name, the address, and the contact details of the operator. So you as a company that submits the DDS. So also what I thought was interesting to include is what does the DDS not contain? Because we've had many questions about this. I've also had questions about this myself. And then I would dive into the regulation. I would sit next to Elisabeth and I would ask, how does this, what is exactly in the DDS? And over time, it became clear to me. So hopefully this slide will also kind of break it down in very clear ways for you. So it does not include a risk assessment. So there's no risk scoring, no justification, no mitigation records. There's no evidence. So you don't include any kind of attachments of legality documents and so forth. There's no deforestation checks. There's no satellite imagery, no geotagged photos, etc. No supplier documentation, so no questionnaires, no audit reports, no traceability files, so no batch level internal mapping, no purchase or sales documentation. And then the decision rationale is also excluded. So there's no internal notes explaining why the risk was deemed negligible. And this, of course, is all part of your total EUDR process. But just to show here that the DDS is really just a sheet of paper that you can then use for customs declarations. But essentially, you only need to do all of this for when your auditor or when in the Netherlands, for example, the NVWA comes knocking and says, hey, we want to check that you're doing EUDR properly. Then they start asking for the documentation that is linked to the DDS, but is not contained in the DDS itself. So, for example, if you're working with Coolset, then NVWA would log into Coolset. They would see all the corresponding documentation with the DDS related to the sales order, for example, and then they could map, okay, this has been done correctly. If, of course, you're working outside of a software solution, you would have those documentations internally stored in different folders that you could then share with them. Yeah, once again, a big reminder, just to make it very clear. So a DDS is automatically generated. It is not a confirmation of compliance. Your national authorities review this information on a per case basis. So to give you a bit of an example, of course, DDS or the EU Traces platform, which we'll cover in a second, is still in its test version, but it's essentially the same principle. So when at Coolset we say request DDS for a product or a sales order, it takes around 1 to 2 to 3 minutes to request it. So it really is just a process of generating a PDF. It doesn't actually check your company as a whole. So now over to EU Traces. So some of you may know it, some of you may not. EU Traces is the platform where the DDS is submitted, retrieved, and referenced, and it's maintained by the European Commission. Its key points are that Traces does not store your entire due diligence file. Traces requires only Annex 2 plus supporting geolocation. And for downstream operators, Traces is the place where you find the reference submitted by your upstream operators. So the Traces platform in itself is kind of more of a monitor, or it's more of a storage platform for your DDS, and it's a collection platform to get them basically exported into your own environment. Quick overview then of where to access it. So we have kind of a quick overview of some slides based on the test environment, also because the final environment is not yet live. I think it also speaks a bit to the capabilities of the European Commission in making this a reality. Also, quick side note here is that they already had a delay of a year. So 2024 EUDR was delayed by a year. They had now over an extra year to create a working EU Traces platform. For those that have been with us for a while, you know that also at some point the Commission wanted to delay EUDR because the Traces platform wasn't ready. That was the infamous letter by Jessica Roswell, but not today's topic, just to give you a bit of a side story before we go into the more practical side. So if you want to access Traces, the link is on the top right. Once again, of course, these slides will be shared with you by the end of the webinar, as well as the recording. So you log into the EU Traces platform where you can then see the following screenshot. You start with creating your account. So here you include all the relevant information. Then you move on and you select your EUDR function. So probably you would choose operator, but for example, you can also say that you are a authorized representative, which can then be a different responsibility within EU Traces. Then there's two options. So either you connect to your company, as you can see here, when we looked at Coolset, we can see Coolset as part of EU Traces already. So there you can say, hey, this is us, connect our account, or you can add company details if you cannot find it. And then you can connect all the relevant information. So then from that point onwards, you can connect it to your own platform. Also good to notice that EU Traces has an API connection. So for example, Coolset is connected to EU Traces by basically a backdoor connection. So if we ever need a DDS, we can click a button, then our platform connects with EU Traces, and they can basically pull out a DDS from that system. But that's also perhaps useful context for organizations that want to have an API connection to DDS, to EU Traces in their own system, or just to understand how the process works. Yeah, and then now I'll give the word to Elisabeth, who will take you through the more practical parts of how to collect all of that data.
Amazing. Thank you very much. So, for this second part of today's session, we're going to practically see a recap from everything that we walked through from the first to the last step, which is the DDS submission, so that we can leave you with a nice recap of everything we went through. So, now that the amendments are there, we have a lot of different essentially pathways that are happening, and not everybody goes through the same end goal. So before we go more deeply into the processes and examples, I would like to state which are these pathways now for you after the amendment. So the first pathway is what we can call normal operators, if that's even a thing. But these are companies essentially that they are placing the relevant product on the EU market for the first time, like importing it from outside of the EU, for example. They are the ones that have the full set of due diligence obligations, and they are the ones that have to go into traces, for example, and create the due diligence statements for each of their orders. Then the second pathway is about downstream operators and traders who now have a lot of changes happening through these amendments. They do not create a due diligence statement anymore, which was the case in the original regulation, and only if they are the first one after the operator, they have to collect the statement numbers from their suppliers and maintain them. And finally, we have a third pathway that covers the small micro primary operators, which is the new category that was introduced by the amendments. And instead of repeating due diligence statements for each shipment or consolidating shipments, they now work with a simplified one-time declaration, which essentially has no information about deforestation or legalities, just a set of administrative information that are requested to be filled. This, of course, does not exist yet in traces. It's something that has to be created as currently also in the test environment. We don't see it anywhere. So you see that all these three sections now interact with the DDSs and traces differently than what they used to do before. Now let's look closely at the first section, which is the first in line operators. And the overall information about them is that they have to start by collecting diligence required documents as per Article 9, of course. And once that is done, they are responsible to do a risk assessment as per Article 10. Of course, not everybody has to do this, only the ones that are sourcing from standard risk countries. And once that is also done, then they prepare and submit the due diligence statement in traces, entering the products, the geolocations, production dates, everything that Jasper just explained to us in the previous slides. And most importantly, now the DDS that this first in line operator created becomes the anchor for everything else downstream, as there will be no further creation of due diligence statements. So you can see that the responsibility is a bit higher now on these particular sectors. And then in terms of timing, based on the final legislative text, large and medium operators will have one extra year to comply, and SMEs following with 6 extra months. And of course, everything that we discussed already are still proposals, even though they have been submitted already by the Parliament. We can still consider them as draft proposals until published in the official journal of the EU. Moving on, we have the second role that we said, first downstream operators, and these are the companies that are buying materials that have already been placed by the EU market by another company. Their main responsibility now is transformed to DDS handling. Before they had to also create and everything, but now you just have to collect and store the upstream DDS if you are the first one that buys from an operator yourself. You also need to have traceability records, so you need to know where your materials came from which supplier, and where are you selling them to, just basic internal traceability. And you never create, as we said, a due diligence statement. Of course, it's interesting to again mention that for further downstream tiers, amendments essentially make it so that you are exclusive, like you're out of scope completely on EUDR. And the timing is very similar to the previous one, with 1 year delay and 1.5 essentially for SMEs. Lastly, we have the small and micro primary operators, and these are natural persons or micro small firms in low risk countries that they are producing the goods themselves. So this is a very, very important thing to mention because we should not just think of SMEs as one. It's only if these are actually happening in your case. And we saw through the amendments also, which of course are pending proposal, that sometimes if your EUDR scope falls under the threshold of small, you can still do it if you are a large or medium company. Anyways, the responsibilities in a summary of the small micro primary operators is that they have now to create a one-time simplified declaration, which will live again most probably in traces. And instead of submitting the DDS now for every shipment, they just have to keep referencing the identifier they will get from traces into all of their orders. Now, when it comes to what is included in this declaration, first of all, we have the basic details of their company, like name, everything that relates to the administrative part. And then we have the HS codes and an estimate of the quantities that they expect they will have to move through the year. But actually, that's a good thing that we need clarifications from, because since this is a one-off now with amendments, we need to see what does it mean when we say quantities. Is it maybe per year? The country of production, and now they can use postal address instead of geolocations. And that's where the requirements end. So essentially, it's just an overview of what is your company about. Of course, one interesting point is that even though they don't have to exercise the whole due diligence process, they are not excluded from the goal of EUDR, which is that they need to place only negligible risk goods in the market. So they need to make sure they are deforestation free and legal. Of course, the way that this will be checked, we don't know yet, and it's something that we will see how the competent authorities will choose to approach. But let's spend now some time to see how these chains that we're talking about work in practice. And we're going to use the example of Canal chocolate, and we're going to break down this big supply chain that we saw initially. First of all, I see actually that there is some issues with our slides. I think something is not working properly, but I think you can get enough of the good information already. So for the first route, we have Canal Chocolate working with a company outside of the EU. And the first thing we can take away from this graph is that whenever you purchase from outside the EU, you're automatically the first operator, regardless of your size. So you have the full set of the due diligence obligations, and creating the due diligence statements. And looking back at the chain, it's a relatively simple chain. And at the beginning, we have the individual plots, where we use the information we can get from the farmers on geolocation and on the basic origin level. Then we have a small aggregator where they essentially can provide you with the rest of the supply chain information. And at the end, we have Canal Chocolate, which could be you potentially, which is requesting this data, running the assessments, and at the end, bearing the full responsibility to create the DDS in traces. Let's see if the issue will be fixed when I move to the next slide as well. And I see that it's not happening. So I think I will continue as is, or
out of the slides and into them again?
yes, let me actually reshare my screen, I would say, so that we can continue.
So there was an issue after.
One simple issue that's I think
it
easy
gets
to
smaller.
fix. Easy to fix.
Yeah.
I think it will work for us now. Okay, that's amazing. So we have now all the nice visuals we have provided for you as well. Nice. So we see that we have now the second route. Again, we are importing from non-EU countries, but now we have a more complex chain. Canal Chocolate, we said, has some plots of land. It's not their own, but they're indirectly partnering with 5 plots of land, with an aggregator and another aggregator that exports the materials until they arrive to them. The key message here is actually that it doesn't matter how many layers exist before you or how complicated the chain is, but if you are the first one bringing the products into the EU, you still have the same responsibilities as we saw in the previous route. So even though the origin has more actors, you still have to create a due diligence statement, and you're just going to have to go through a more important process to actually get to the creation of your due diligence statement than with the one step in line. Now, this gets more interesting now because it involves a lot of the amendments that are proposed. And in this route, Canal Chocolate is no longer importing materials. They're buying from an EU wholesaler who already has placed the product in the market. And this means that the due diligence statement is created one step before them. The wholesaler is the first in line operator. They bring the materials to the EU, so they have created already the DDS. And this makes Canal Chocolate the first downstream operator. And their role now changes to the original, which is that they don't have to create a new due diligence statement. They just have to collect this DDS that supplier 3 created. And now they just have to maintain the records of how they use these materials and where do these due diligence statements belong to in terms of sales. This was not in the original graph that we showed you, but we added one more route for Canal Chocolate so that you see another example. In this chain, we have 2 steps inside the EU before it reaches Canal Chocolate. The first EU wholesaler is the operator again. They created the DDS, but this time they first sold it to another supplier, which could be very much easily the case for many companies. And now we saw that the responsibilities that Canal Chocolate had before are now responsibilities of supplier 4, where they collect the DDS and they keep the traceability records. This means now that Canal Chocolate does not buy anymore from an operator, but from a downstream operator or trader. This makes it that they are completely out of scope for this specific flow. I think what is important to emphasize here is that most companies, including Canal Chocolate, rarely operate under one single role, and most probably your procurement choices create different routes. And yeah, like a business can be an importer in one time and then a downstream operator in another. So we need to be very critical with the amendments that are happening, because even though they do introduce simplifications, most of the companies now have to deal with different responsibilities inside the same company just to make it so that they comply with the different roles assigned to them. But now, to wrap up the series, we have some checklists that we would like to give you so that you can take them and bring them into practice in your own companies potentially, that summarize actionably what you need to be doing end to end in order to get to compliance per role. So this slide brings everything together for large and medium operators and the companies essentially that perform the full due diligence process. Again, you might be a small and micro, etc. But if you are importing, you still have to go through this process that we're talking now. And the process starts with mapping and preparing. You have to identify your suppliers, onboard them, give them the right knowledge and trainings that they need. Next step is benchmarking. So check whether your sourcing countries are classified as low or standard risk. That is very important because it will determine the next step, which is collecting data. You need to collect all the data of Article 9 and everything that you need extra in order to assess the risks of Article 10 in case you're sourcing from standard risk countries. Which leads to the next step, which is assessing. You have to assess all the risks of Article 10. Of course, this can be skipped. And if any risks are above the negligible status, you have to move on to the next step, which is mitigate. You need to mitigate everything before you can create the due diligence statement. Once you have done this, the next step is to submit. So then you have everything ready, and then every time you have an order that comes from an origin that you have already collected, assessed, and mitigated, you can be creating new due diligence statements for your orders. And last but not least, you need to record everything, the DDS number, the evidence bundle, and everything that you used in order to conclude to this negligible result. You need to have it in your internal system along with the DDS references you created. Now, moving to the downstream operators and traders, of course, this is a much lighter workflow now, and along with the amendments proposed. These are the companies that don't place materials themselves, but they buy from someone inside the EU, as we said. And the first step here after amendments is that you have to confirm your eligibility. We have now this extra layer where you have to cross-check for all your sourcing paths if you're buying from someone that is acting already as a downstream operator, or if you are buying from someone that acts as the operator. And depending on this, you might be out of scope. But if you're not out of scope, you then need to collect the due diligence statement references or identifiers in case you buy from small micro primary operators. And you also need to have the basic traceability records. And lastly, record everything again in your internal systems. It's going to be much less the things that you have to record, but you still have to record them. So to recap this one, you confirm if you're eligible, you collect the references, you keep the records, and you store the records in your systems. Then for small micro primary operators, we have this like new niche group that was introduced. Your first step is confirm your role. Make sure that you fall under this exact definition, because you don't want to find yourself surprised that you're not part of it. So ask yourself, am I buying, am I the one that creates the materials myself, or am I buying from someone that is the farmer themselves? And then, am I in a low or standard? Everybody that is inside the EU will be low, of course. But then you also now need to confirm your size, because of course you need to be small micro, but also if you're a large or medium, you can still be part of this group if you can prove that you have like just a small EUDR section that falls into these categories. After you have confirmed that you are indeed inside this category, then you have to just submit this one-time declaration once it's going to be ready. That's it. You don't have to do anything else with traces or anything else with EUDR for that matter, apart from the next step, which is keep the traceability records. If you have especially more than one plot of land, it's important that you know everything, which is part of business as usual. It's nothing more than what you do already. And at the end, you have again to record this unique identifier number that you're going to get in your internal systems and pass it on to essentially your customers, which will be downstream operators.
You muted yourself.
I think I am.
God, why is there always? It says they can hear me, but they can hear you, but from my microphone.
Should we switch? Let's do for the last section.
Yeah, let's give it one try here.
It always happens midpoint.
It's working, I think.
Okay. Let us know if you still cannot hear me.
Oh, wait. Sorry.
We can hear you, somebody says.
I just change it again. Can you hear Elisabeth?
Yes. Okay, that's
Okay.
nice. Amazing. Thanks so much. Amazing. So, yeah, I think that concludes this relatively small route. The main takeaways from this is create this one time, pass it on to all your customers, and you're done. You don't need to do this again. And then we have one last slide, which is informative. And this is who is responsible for all of these tasks that we discussed. Before I go into the table, I just want to explain how this matrix works. For every task, we have someone that is responsible, someone that is accountable, someone that is consulted, and someone that is informed about the task in hand. So the responsible is the one that performs the task. The accountable is they own the outcome of or they need to sign off. They need to be informed. They need to be part of the decision, but not doing the actual task. Then they need to be consulted, is any team that can provide any input or expertise. And informed is that they just need to be, they have visibility about things. So how do we map this out for EUDR? When it comes to engaging suppliers, procurement usually will be the one that does the actual work, as they have close contact with the suppliers, and even though they are responsible, sustainability teams should help them, giving them all the information. The rest of the teams can just be informed around what's happening. When it comes to mapping the countries to benchmarks and to gathering the different data, both of course sustainability and procurement are involved, but now sustainability has the responsibility role, where they of course are the ones that know exactly what is needed. They know how to record them, but procurement will be very closely involved, as it's their suppliers and their relationship. They do the relationship management. When it comes to risk assessments, exactly same process, where a sustainability is the one that can perform this, and procurement has even less role on this. And then when it comes to due diligence statement creation, even though sustainability teams are responsible for the outcome, the logistics, usually and operation teams, are the ones that will have to deal with all the due diligence statements and with all the creation of lots and orders. So it makes sense that you place the responsibility closer to your logistics and operations. Let's mention also here that IT teams might need to be involved here, as well as accountable, because you need to record all these things into your databases as well. And similarly, to retain all the data, of course, IT systems can help you a lot, and everything that has to do with data and how you retain data will need to own this task, along with sustainability, which gives the drum roll essentially on where the what materials need to be kept for audit. I think this concludes our session, and then I just have some small section today, which I will go quickly so that we have more time for the Q&A, and is a short overview of how we approach EUDR compliance at Coolset, and we have defined 5 steps to success for this, which is the first, we enable the traceability exercise all the way to the farmer. So our software allows you to import all your sales, your purchase, and you create due diligence requests that get passed on to end-to-your suppliers until you can collect all the data that is needed. And once you have collected all the data, the software runs specific customized assessments that are based on each origin and each supplier. And this way, at the end, you can review each entity and their scores on the basic EUDR requirements. And for this, we use multiple data sets, satellite imagery, and document verification. Of course, there will be cases where mitigation is needed, as risk will not always be negligible, and that for that we have some mitigation tickets that we open for every single non-negligible risk that we find. And of course, today's session also was about due diligence statements creation. So after all the processes are done, you need to submit due diligence statements for your orders. And the thing is that our software helps you create these statements by itself in one click of a button, since it does all the pass on to traces for you. You can also opt for bulk creation, for example, of due diligence statements through our app. And last but not least, in order to complete the compliance loop, you need to be audit ready. So our platform allows you to keep this 5-year record and all the evidence, and that's on each order, which allows you for full traceability. And you can even invite an auditor and point them out to the order they want to check, and they could see by themselves and self-serve themselves in doing the audit for you. So yeah, I hope this is a little bit helpful for you to understand how we approach this. And with that in mind, I would like to mention that as part of the EUDR preparations, we're offering also these one-to-one sessions with our research team to explore further, your requirements, help you navigate your first steps. So in case you're interested, feel free to click on the poll that this is something that you might be finding useful, and we will make sure that we contact you in case you clicked yes. Of course, if you're still looking for more information, you can feel free to skip this and click no. Also, Jasper mentioned at the beginning that as we do in other webinar series as well, we will share with you a certificate in case you followed at least 3 out of our 4 sessions, which you can use then for your own LinkedIn, or internally you can share with your colleagues that you did this. And if you rewatched the session, so if you didn't see live all 3 or 4 out of them, you can send us a message if you rewatched, and then we can send you the certificate again. And yeah, I think that's all from our side, so we can move on to a short Q&A session.
Perfect. Yeah, so that was the winter school. Bringing it to an end. But of course, we never end a session without answering the questions that we've received, and I've seen a lot of good questions coming in. Yeah, so we're nearing the end of our time, but we'll stay on for a couple of minutes to answer some of your questions. So feel free to stay on. So first question here from Joel. We are a holding that has several companies. Only one of the companies is importing EUDR materials from outside of the EU. Is it better to add an account in Traces in the name of the holding, or for the companies that are importing? What do you think?
Yeah, I think you should do one account for each of your individual legal entities. So the holding has essentially no trading activities. So just use the ones that are involved in the sales and purchases of the materials.
Yeah. And I've gotten a couple of questions about the downstream operator responsibilities. So some questions on how do you make sure that you're the downstream operator? A question on how do you assert due diligence? So just to be aware of everyone's time, I'm going to select one question that hopefully they'll answer several of these questions. Let's see which one I wanted to add. Yeah, so here, question from Joanna. For Route 4, so as you remember, Elisabeth was proposing several routes, and Route 4 was the one where you have the downstream operator, which doesn't do any due diligence. So if Canal Chocolate is the downstream operator that don't do due diligence anymore. So the question here is, how does supplier 4 know they are the second in the row? So they need to keep DDS records. Is it mandatory to collect DDS from suppliers or to pass DDS numbers to customers, in between brackets, if our company is the one that submits them? That is a good question. So essentially, so the first line operator will of course know that they're first in line as they're importing from a non-EU company. But for you, it will be trickier because maybe you're the second in line, maybe you're the third or the fourth in line. But that is also something that your supplier will communicate with you, as they will say, well, you don't need to do it because we're the first in line. And that essentially covers it for you. But also a good tip here is that essentially if you are importing from an EU company, that is a way for you to know that you're not the first line operator. So that's either you're the second, third, or fourth. At that point, it doesn't really matter all too much anymore. You don't have to do the due diligence anymore. It's more about keeping trace of your imports. Anything to add there?
Yeah, I think the only part is that it feels like there's a second part in that question, which is if you have to collect the DDS from the suppliers and pass the DDS numbers to customers. I think you have to do this only if you are the operator essentially now. So you have to pass on the one if you are the operator, but the first downstream, in case you are the first downstream, you need to collect it, but you're not required to give it. If you want to do it so that you explain you are very good and compliant, you can, but you're not required to. But yeah, when it comes to how will you know, you just have to ask yourself, where am I buying? Where is my supplier buying materials from?
Perfect. And then let me see if there are any more questions. So one question from Maria, which is very quick. Can UK companies access Traces? No, they cannot. So you need an EU tax number to access Traces. So if you want to access Traces for whatever reason, because technically you don't need to report on it as a UK company, you have to have an authorized representative that can access it for you. Maybe the last question of the Winter School, a question by Annabelle. Are you classified as a trader if you are selling EUDR relevant products to other EU companies, or is the EU company buying the EUDR relevant products that is classified as a trader?
Yeah, trader means essentially if you purchase materials from an EU company and you're selling it or exporting it as is without making any changes, without manufacturing, for example. So let's do an example. If Canal Chocolate was buying cocoa from Route 4 and they were selling cocoa as it is, and they didn't make chocolate with it, they would be a trader. Now, because they make chocolate with it and then sell it, they become downstream operator. So every time both downstream operators and traders buy from EU sources, And the difference is, am I manufacturing something and selling a different HS code, or I'm selling the same HS code to my customers?
And that concludes it. So for now, yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I won't be saying see you next week anymore, which is a bit sad, but I hope that you all, learned something in today's session as well, and that you know that you can always reach out to us if you have questions. Our email addresses are jasper@coolstar.com and elisabeth@coolstar.com. Of course, we'll be reaching out to you with the slides after this webinar and the recording. And to those that attended 3 out of 4 sessions, we'll send the certificate as well. If you didn't attend 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4 sessions, but you watched the recordings, feel free to reach out to us and we'll send them to you over email. And of course, every certificate will have your name on it, so it's personalized. Thank you so much, everyone. Elisabeth and I really enjoyed these sessions. We hope you did too, and see you around for the next one. Bye, everyone.